Hello, welcome back to Mark's Garden UK. In these two buckets I've got some asparagus crowns. It's May, so I'm a little late to be doing this, but when I was at a garden centre yesterday I picked up these asparagus crowns, two different varieties, reduced from £4 to 50p a packet, so I thought I can't refuse that. I've also got my Vegega metal raised bed here, and that's an excellent thought for asparagus because it's a metre deep, and some of these asparagus varieties will put roots down a metre. And asparagus is a long-term crop. It can last up to 20 years and keep producing asparagus for up to 20 years, which is neat because these raised beds have got a lifespan of 20 years. So I'll be able to plant these asparagus crowns in these raised beds and hopefully get crops until I'm 76 years old in 20 years time. Anyway, in this video I'm going to tell you all I've learned about asparagus whilst doing my research for planting these crowns into this raised bed. The first thing I learned was actually you should be doing this in spring, so May is a little bit late because it's late spring, but early spring really is the right time to be planting these crowns. I'll also tell you how to look after the asparagus, how to harvest it, and how to care for it in the winter time. But let's have a little bit of a look at these crowns. Now these came in polythene bags in some dry compost, and because it's late in the season to be planting them I decided to rehydrate them, so I've had them in water. Got two different varieties. I've got Connoisseur's Colossal and I've also got Pacific Purple. Now apparently the Pacific Purple one doesn't contain a chemical called lignin, which is the chemical which is responsible for them going stringy sometimes as they get older, so hopefully that will remain a nice tender eat, and hopefully if you harvest these at the right time and cook them properly they won't go stringy either. Anyway, let's get on with the job. So I've kept them separate. I've got my Pacific Purple in this jug here, and I've got my Connoisseur Colossal in this pail. We'll have a close look at the crowns in a minute, but you may well have seen this before. Now that's all my research there on a piece of paper. This raised bed is a kind of a hugelkultur raised bed. It's got a load of logs at the bottom, and over 20 years they will decay and rot down, and all the invertebrates and microorganisms will use that to produce food in this lovely raised bed. And then I've got a layer of organic matter and well-rotted manure. And then at the top here I've got organic but well-drained soil, and that's what you need for asparagus. Organic, well enriched but well-drained soil. So that's got a lot of well-rotted manure from my neighbour's ponies. Just off camera there I've got a wheelbarrow full of the topsoil that I've used here. I've also got some slow release fertiliser which I'm going to add to this, and I've got my riddle, and you'll see what that's all about in a minute when I explain how I'm going to go about planting these. What you're supposed to do is dig a trench, and then in the trench you build a little mound, and then you get your crown and you dangle the roots on either side of that mound, and then you fill it back in. Now I'm going to put the trench in here and the mound, and then in order to fill it back in I'm going to riddle some of that soil on top. So let's get on with it. I'm going to bring the camera a little bit closer so that you can see the construction that I'm about to make in this raised bed before I plant these crowns in it. I'm actually doing two trenches because I'm going to do a parallel line of asparagus, but I'm going to offset them. So I'll put one at either end, and then I'll have two rows coming down here. So these are my two trenches here coming down the side, almost like in a loop going around the bed. And then what I will have to do is find some way, that's a big boulder that can come out, find some way of building this mound down the centre of this trench to place the crown on top of. So I'll get on with that and I'll come back to you when I've managed to do that. So there we go, that was fun. I do like getting my hands in the soil. This is a tool called a grubbing hoe. Probably the singularly most useful tool I've ever bought, and I'll put the Amazon link in the description box below this video because it's a great little tool for carving out the soil, and it's also great for moving the soil from side to side. So if you want to have one of those, have a look at the description box below this video. But hopefully you can see there, I've got like a kind of a racing track going round in the form of a mound, and that goes all the way around that, and I'm going to sit these little asparagus crowns on top of that now with the roots on either side, and so that they're not competing too much with each other, I'm going to offset them. Now you are supposed to plant these a foot to 18 inches apart. That's about a foot long, so these are a little bit tight, but they've got a bed to themselves. There's not going to be anything else planted in here. And one of the things with asparagus is you keep them well fed, you keep them well watered, you put them in a bed on their own, and you remove all the weeds so they've got no competition, and that way they'll thrive. So I'm now going to lay out my asparagus crowns on top of this little mound that you've seen me create, and then I'm going to riddle soil on top of them to bury them. So there you can see, I've put my 10 crowns in this bed, and as I've already explained, I've drooped the roots of the crown over this ridge. In a moment, I'm going to fill that up with riddle soil out of the wheelbarrow. Before I do that, I just wanted to show you, there's a sweet fennel here, and this is what the leaves of that are going to be like. And I'm telling you that for a reason, because in the wind, they can blow around. So at the end of the season, when you're finished harvesting them, you let them grow up. So after June, you stop harvesting and you let them grow like that, so that the plant can recover and become established, so that it can produce crop next year. So the reason I'm saying that is, when it gets to that stage, you might need to give some support to the plant up here, because that swaying can damage the crown. For propagation, what you can do, when this bed becomes full, I can dig them up and separate the crowns carefully. But you don't put asparagus back where you took it out from. You take it somewhere else in the garden. So when I eventually, in a few years' time, find that this is overcrowded with asparagus and the crop is diminishing, and I take them all out and divide them, I'll give some away to friends and family, and I'll plant the rest back somewhere else. But I'm hoping to get crops out of this bed for 20 years to come. So now I'm going to riddle some more soil on top of this. Now you harvest asparagus from April to June, but you don't ever harvest in the first year. You leave it alone for 1 or 2 years to let it get established, and that will reward you with greater crops in the future, in years to come. And you can cut down all the growth in the autumn time at the end of the season, and you can cover it with a mulch of well-rotted manure, and that will leach down into the soil and provide food for next year's crop. You can even cover the bed that your asparagus is in weed fabric or weed control membrane over the winter to stop weeds growing or to stop seeds from coming up. And this is a lovely, enriched but well-drained fine tilth, which I'm shaking on top of these crowns, and they'll eventually be buried. And the bits that I don't want in the bed, I'm just casting them to one side here in this L-shaped metal raised bed. Now these crowns that you're watching me plant are actually dormant roots. By planting them out and giving them access to feed and water, you bring them out of dormancy. Now I think it's pretty obvious, but everyone seems to be at pains to point out you don't eat the roots. Why would you? But anyway, I'm just letting you know, because that's what everyone else says. And in terms of feeding, you need to keep them well watered, especially in the first year when they're getting established. But when they are established, they are actually quite drought tolerant, but in order to help with the harvest, it's a good idea at the start of the year to give them a high potassium feed. And if you notice the crop or the harvest starting to diminish, then at the end of that season, before the autumn, you can give them another top dress of a high potassium feed. But if you give them a good mulch at the end of every season with some well rotted manure, you'll always get a good crop. Now, they say there's nothing new under the sun, and everything I'm telling you is based on research I've done off the internet. It's probably well-known stuff, but I've got to give some credit to the RHS. I always think the Royal Horticultural Society are a brilliant resource, and they are my first port of call really when I want to know something. So they've done a fact sheet on asparagus, and I'll put a link to that in the description box below this video. I'll continue riddling this lovely fine tilt over these asparagus crowns. Now you'll notice I've left a good couple of inches, 3 inches at the top of this, so that I can add mulch and I can also flood it with water. If you fill your pots or your raised beds right to the top, the water just runs off. I also watered every element of this raised bed as I was filling it. And as I fill it, I can see dozens of little tiny worms and creatures and invertebrates. And they're the creatures that will wriggle down into this soil and start munching away at that hugel culture at the bottom of this raised bed and turn it into plant food. And as I mentioned earlier, these asparagus plants will eventually, potentially, have roots which are a metre deep. So there we go. That is a raised bed planted up with probably too many asparagus crowns. If you've got more space, use the space and put them a foot to 18 inches apart. I'm a little bit ambitious, but I'll give it lots of food. And if you want to see how it turns out, I will keep you updated, but you'll need to subscribe and hit the notifications bell. I'm going to put a bit more soil on top of this, then give it a really good soaking. So there you go, my first timer asparagus top tips. Excuse the pun, all based on research off the internet. Don't forget, if you wish to have a look at the RHS link in the description box below this video. And of course, this is my hugel culture Vegega metal raised bed, which I did a review on. And if you want to know more about them, I'll put a link to this product in the description box below this video. I'm excited about this, can't wait to see how this turns out. And if you're as excited about it as I am, please do subscribe, hit the notifications bell, and I'll see you soon for some more asparagus raised bed adventures. Bye for now.